Welcome to the Embodiment Matters podcast with me, Erin Giesemann-Rabke, and my beloved Carl Rabke. We don't have the luxury of living in ordinary times, but rather we live in extraordinary ones where the way we live in the next decade will make a huge difference in the future of life on planet Earth. We aspire in this tapestry of rich conversations drawn from a variety of wise perspectives to share resources to help you embody the wisdom, compassion, and skillful actions that are needed during these times. You can find out more about our classes and sign up for our newsletter at embodimentmatters.com. You can also become a supporting member of our podcast with a small monthly donation. Look for Embodiment Matters at patreon.com.
Greetings, listener friends. We are so glad you're here. We had the good fortune to speak with Langston Kahn. And Langston is a Black queer teacher and shamanic practitioner who specializes in radical human transformation, ancestral healing, and restoring an authentic relationship with our emotions. He stands firmly at the crossroads, his practice informed by somatic modalities, contemporary shamanic traditions, initiations into the traditions of the African diaspora, and the healing spirits and ancestors weaving it all together. Langston gives workshops and lectures internationally, both in person and online, and serves in the leadership by counsel of the Last Mass community, a collective of people striving to live in alignment with ancient shamanic principles in service of personal and collective liberation. And most recently, Langston is the author of the wonderful book, Deep Liberation: Shamanic Teachings for Reclaiming Wholeness in a Culture of Trauma. He lives in the ancestral lands of the Lenape, Rockaway, and Karnasi, also known as New York City. And you can find out more about his work at his website, langstonkahn.com. So in this conversation, we really dive into a wide range of topics. We talk, of course, about embodiment and his perspective of embodiment being the willingness to be in a state of flux and change and not to get stuck on one story of who we are. We explore the practice of focusing, the method of somatic inquiry that was developed by Jean Genlin and which Langston learned from his mom, and how the principles and pedagogy of focusing, the ways of being in relationship with one's inner life, supported Langston in being in relationship with the more than human world in his shamanic and ancestral practices. We discuss shamanism and the edges around cultural appropriation and capitalism. And we also look into the way that each of us comes to the world with just kind of a central focus or purpose, and how to be in a life-giving relationship with that purpose. So we go into all sorts of great territory with Langston, and we really hope you enjoy the conversation and encourage you to check out his website and his book. Again, it's langstonkahn.com, and enjoy the conversation. So welcome, Langston. We're so happy to be with you today.
Thank you. It's so good to be with both of you.
So a way that we like to start off these conversations is just with the question of what is embodiment? And I know we're both really interested to hear your unique perspective on that question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, more and more how I've been thinking about embodiment is the willingness to be in a state of flux and change. That I think when we leave what you might call embodiment is when we become fixed. We think, oh, okay, that's been enough transformation for this lifetime. I'm good now. I can just be this thing. And we get sort of stuck or fixed on one idea of who we are, one story of who we are, that begins to cut us off from the sort of limitless, vast, changing force that all of life is, that we're part of as part of life. And so to me, embodiment is being willing to stay in relationship with that ever-shifting energy that is all of life.
Yeah, I love that.
First of all, I want to say your book is beautiful, and congratulations.
Thank you so much.
And I love to ask the question of just what's your sense of where we are now? How do you frame it? How do you describe it? Maybe it's changed since your book came out because it all is in flux, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of different places we are. I think because, I don't think there's one place all of life is or all of humanity is right now. And that's almost something that I think is unique about the time we're in, where it's like all these different stories and times kind of colliding with each other and bumping up against each other and trying to get sorted out, maybe. I don't know. And so I guess right now where I am is currently really interested in I think I'm in a moment, and the communities that I'm part of are in a moment where we really have to look at how do we move beyond the excitement of seeing like, oh, these technologies really work. Like this embodiment technology really works to help me uncover more of who I am and bring it into action in my life. And also, I feel like this is really working to, connect with these helping spirits or connect with these spirits of the land. Like, wow, this is real. Like I'm sort of breaking through these colonial constructs that I was raised in. Like that's what I'm seeing in this collective atmosphere right now. And how do we move beyond the wow into the really deeply practical, small daily actions that we're taking every day based on the reality of those experiences, not just sort of seeking what's the next peak experience I can have, what's the next extreme I can find of bursting out of the old culture, but how do I actually step by step in my day begin to live more of my life in that new story of understanding the truth of what we could be as humanity, that we could be this beautiful, healthy organ in this larger body of all of life, doing our human thing as the human organ is meant to do. But we're so the gap between where we are currently and where we sort of, I think of as are meant to be in that organ, in that body of all of life is so vast. So I think we need to start looking at how do we bridge that gap? And it's not like no one's doing that. I think a lot of people are doing that, but I still see this stuckness around the conversation just stopping at, oh, this works, versus like, okay, now how do we actually engage sort of animist shamanic cosmologies to actually create real change?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'd love to take that into, I love taking it beyond the wow, like, whoa, this works. And then maybe for you to reflect a little bit on what healing is, both sort of individual work with healing and also the collective that's being invited, and how to go beyond the wow into genuine healing.
Yeah. So one way I think about healing, I think a part of healing that gets missed a lot is not like how do we heal when we've been wounded, but what do we need to be in a state of health and well-being in each day. I think we can get sort of stuck in looking for the next wound to uncover and transform, and that's beautiful and important work. And to sustain that kind of work and not like, well, another way to put this is I sometimes see people, and even myself, with the needed pendulum swing to talking more about trauma after so much denial of the reality of trauma in our culture. There's this danger, though, that then as that pendulum swings into the trauma land, that we start to kind of try to use trauma as a cosmology to understand life. So like using things like attachment theory or polyvagal theory as a guide for how all of our life should look, when I think that ultimately shrinks the magic and mystery of life and what's possible when we're willing to step into like the mythic reality beneath the surface of things that you get in sort of more, indigenous cosmologies. And so I think for me, healing is that, again, how I defined embodiment too, of that willingness to stay in relationship with yourself as a living process, to find where is the next place that my living process is wanting to go, where is the next part of my soul that is not yet manifest in the world that's wanting to be made manifest, and how do I get there? What help do I need from others? What needs to die inside me? What do I need to have faith in? What do I need to give birth to continue moving in that healing journey?
Mm-hmm. I'm so glad you named that. That feels really important and not spoken to enough.
Yeah.
I would love to almost sort of backtrack a little bit to invite you, for people who aren't familiar with you yet, to describe what you do. How do you frame your work in the world? And I have a sense that, kind of like us, your work in the world is also just who you are and what you're doing in the world. So.
And always in flux.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think a big part of my work is bridging what is ours to do as our own, inner human work, and what is the role of spirit in all that, or practitioners in all that, and how do we bridge that gap and really understand those different responsibilities. So a lot of my work as a shamanic practitioner is doing things like soul retrieval, where I'm going to a part of someone's soul that was sort of cut off in a moment of trauma, where they felt like they couldn't continue on in their life in the amount of pain they were in. So I had to let that part that was in pain go so they could continue on and survive. It's sort of this like survival at all costs, like survival even if I have to cut off parts of myself to survive. And so what I would do in my work with soul retrieval is find that part, explain, what it's doing, where it is, what age it's at, because when parts are cut off in that way, they sort of get stuck at the age they were in that moment they were cut off, and bring that part back and help the person to integrate that part and understand, what do I need to start doing or stop doing for this part to fully come back online? Because it's not just a case of like a missing puzzle piece. Okay, now I'm whole. I got the soul retrieval. There's usually like an influx of energy and change that comes, and even old memories that come back. But you've spent your life developing survival mechanisms to avoid touching into that hole within yourself often. So once I bring that part back, then we need to talk about, okay, so now how do I undo those ways I learned to survive without this essential part of myself?
Mm-hmm.
And that sort of bridges into the other part of my work, which has a lot to do with helping guide people deep into their own inner landscape, to do their own work of finding the selves who made those choices to survive, and helping support those selves so they can unmake those choices and reclaim the energy that got stuck in those moments of fear where they had to make those choices to survive that weren't necessarily in alignment with their authenticity.
Mm-hmm. I really love, we also work with interrelationship focusing and variations on that. And I really love that you shared about learning that from your mom. We have a 10-year-old, and often bring that, not formally, but invite him to, be compassionate presence with the parts of him that are suffering and, or struggling or whatever. But I would just love to hear you talk a little bit about that part I'm so fascinated by how you weave the shamanic practice and that kind of inner listening together.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just so wonderful to think about you. Yeah, sharing that compassionate presence with your little one. That's so beautiful. I learned after college. I was in a pretty rough place. I was working kind of 72-hour days doing like production design on film sets and stuff. I went to school for film, and I just had a lot of chronic physical and emotional issues, autoimmune issues that were coming up that hadn't really been dealt with. I didn't really have the tools to go in within my healing process. And my mom at the time was teaching interrelationship focusing. So I was very lucky. I got to go through all these different levels of focusing with her as my teacher, and learn these deep tools for coming into relationship with my inner experience that I didn't have at the time. I spent a lot of my life very dissociated from my body, and I often felt like I couldn't give voice to my emotions in real time. Like it took me like weeks of feeling grief or sadness or depression before suddenly I would start like shaking and crying and it would all come out. But it wasn't like this, like what I think now that emotions are meant to be, these kind of elemental forces rising up through our day, coming into expression, being felt and released, and the next one coming up, just this healthy flow of communication between the body and the soul through our emotions. I didn't have that. And so focusing really allowed me to bring that compassionate presence to myself and begin to bridge that gap. And also it really taught me how to talk to spirits, honestly, because so much of spirit communication, in at least my perspective on it, it's through the same symbol set. So if you're learning to speak the symbolic language and interpret the symbolic language of your own body and your felt sense in your body, you can engage that same symbol set to speak with spirits and really interpret the messages you're getting more accurately. So it was like a big turning point, learning focusing in my life.
I feel like I want you to tell a story about that. Like, okay, that's so good and about it. And like, I'm sure you have some story you can tell about either inner relationship or speaking to spirits and unpack that a little bit.
Absolutely. So, really, when I first started doing what you might call shamanic journeying, going into a trance state with a drum, what I found it very difficult. I mostly just saw blackness. It's like, I don't know what's happening. I don't know where the on switch is. And people would, when I would go to these sort of journey circles, I didn't have great luck with them. And a lot of the people would be like, oh, you'll get it one day, like, or you're just too young or something. Like there was just this sort of air of mystery, like maybe, like clearly they didn't really understand what they were doing either. They were just, So it was frustrating. And it wasn't until I think one of my teachers at the time, I was practicing with a Wiccan coven, a Gardnerian Wiccan coven, pretty rigorously. And I think the combination of practicing with that coven, like we were celebrating, the holidays and doing like rigorous, like psychic development work together and rituals and spell work. And then combining that with this deep listening to life as a teacher through the focusing work I was doing and seeing what my felt sense was sharing with me, I think my helping spirits were like, okay, he's ready. Let's talk to him. Like, let's start actually speeding this process up here because he's running a little late. And I had this sort of initiatory dream where the spirit came to me, and in the dream, they were covered in these sort of parasites and ticks, and they kept landing on my chest. And I asked if it was sort of one of my animal helping spirits, and because I sort of knew that was a thing. And in the dream, they said yes. And then I said, can I ask it to go away? Because it was just this like gross animal covered in ticks. And so I asked it they said, yes, but you have to ask its name first. And so I asked its name, and it gave me its name, and then it flew away. And after that dream, I went with the people that were in my coven at that time. We decided to sort of journey to this energy and see what's this all about? What's going on? Does like the spirit need help? Like what's going on? And the spirit just laughed at me and said, you're the one who needs help. But that was a sort of turning point in my journey work, because I realized how similar sort of the dream symbolism was and my focusing symbolism was and the journey symbolism was. So I started being able to sort of use that muscle and realize that the compassionate presence I was cultivating and focusing was a kind of trance state as well. It wasn't as deep as a journey state, but it was like sort of like a good primer for me to begin to move into those deeper states.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm really touched by the commonality of basically like fundamental respectful relationship skills, whether that's with things that are going on in the body and the inner life, or in relating with unseen beings or the more than human world, like just how to have the reciprocity rather than a kind of model of extraction, which we so often have with our body states or the world around us.
Or dreams.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that. I love that sort of relational model. I feel like I've learned so much about healthy relationships from interaction with my own inner relationships and also interaction with helping spirits more than I have from other human beings in a way. Because the feedback is quicker sometimes, they're more honest with those energies and of your own inner self or with helping spirits. But I remember, one of the first times I actually got imagery in a focusing session, I was sort of just going in, trying to be with my inner experience and the felt sense in my body. And suddenly this big rose bloomed from my heart and this mermaid sort of flew out of it. And I was like, what's that? I'm not going to say that out loud. That's weird. Like, why is there a mermaid in my heart? Yeah. But then I remembered, like you're talking about relationality and respect, I remembered, well, if I'm judging something as weird, I'm not in a compassionate presence. That means there's another part that I have to kind of say hello to and just identify with so I can come back into the fullness of myself and my body's wisdom. And I did that. And I felt so acutely this part of me that had said, that's weird, I can't say that. That's messed up, that mermaid in your heart, what the hell? And it was like this little gargoyle on the right side of my shoulder that was all like, had its arms crossed and its face like all like pinched. And it just was trying to protect me, by not wanting me to be weird or shake the boat or something. And the second I was really able to turn and be with that part of me and just honor its perspective and listen to it without trying to ignore it or get identified with it, it shifted into this white gloved hand pointing back to the mermaid. And then I was able to go into this deep sort of experience.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thanks for sharing that.
Mm-hmm. I just love the way, I know you write about this and we have experience with this both in focusing and the kind of, the Feldenkrais work that we do has the similar way of relating with, our somatic physicality that not trying to change it, but being with it from that state of compassionate presence allows you to return to that state of flux you started talking about today. It just like comes back into the flow of life again.
Exactly. It's so interesting how the moment we stop thinking we know what's needed, thinking with our mind or our ego that like we know what needs to happen or what needs to be fixed or what needs to be changed, and can just be with things as they are, that's when they inevitably begin to shift and change. It's like all of our striving is sort of keeping these things out of that flux, weirdly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's interesting with, one of my, primary teachers in my shamanic lineage, Christina Pratt, who also developed the deep liberation process that I talk about in the book a lot. She sometimes calls that process focusing for impatient people, jokingly, because bringing in this sort of shamanic cosmology and the shamanic skills of energetic tracking, there's a way that we continually are coming back to the felt sense and those like foundational skills of focusing, but we're also learning sort of pattern recognition, how to stay in that state of compassionate presence and not trying to fix or change, but also tracking energy to its root and working with it there where it first started. Because if you're able to do that, then it changes every later iteration of the pattern as well from a shamanic perspective. I guess constantly what I'm also doing in my own healing work for people, trying not to fix problems on the surface, like, oh, just move on this dead person for you, but actually looking at, so why was that dead person stuck? And why were you the person they got attached to? And is there a deeper pattern in your ancestral lines I need to go to its root to shift and heal that there and then pull that whole pattern out of the lineage? Or is there some, wound in you that caused you to be vulnerable to this kind of attachment? And do we need to go there? So I think that training in the deep liberation process of always trying to work at the earliest place something happened helped train me also for the healing work that I do as well in a big way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's beautiful. Maybe we can just talk a little bit about shamanism and people's concerns about cultural appropriation and how you relate to that and your own process around that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for that question. How I think about shamanism, first of all, the shamanism that I practice, I think of it as small s shamanism versus big S shamanism. So I would say big S shamanism is like, shamanism of, Mongolian shamanism or, the event people, the places or Korean shamanism, places where the word is culturally used for that role. Now, why I still think the small s shamanism word is important, and I don't think, personally, I don't throw it out with the bathwater despite its baggage of very real harm and cultural appropriation, is because in much of Western culture, or just contemporary culture, we don't have necessarily, we've lost our words for that role of shaman. And I think it is a very specific role that is found cross-culturally to varying degrees. Not all cultures are shamanic cultures, not all animist cultures are shamanic cultures, but in the cultures where this particular role is found, where someone is tending balance between the individual and their own soul, the individual and their family, the family and their community, and the community and the environment and spirit world, through entering into these deep trance states and moving out to the realm of the helping spirits, or bringing the helping spirits in through embodiment and trance states. That particular role, I think, is important to tend through that word. And, when you look at the history, Mircea Eliade, the Romanian scholar, when he wrote Archaic Techniques of Ecstasy, spent a lot of his kind of academic and cultural capital that he had spent a long time working as a religious scholar to build, to put forward that people who are practicing in this way weren't hucksters. They weren't, crazy, as most academics at that time were saying, or most anthropologists even were saying, but actually held this vital role that was really important to understand as part of the legacy of humanity, And I think for me that, Mircea Eliade hadn't really ever met even shamans. He was mostly working off of anthropological texts. And then, other people followed afterwards, building on his work in different ways. And I think there's many ways the word is used in harmful ways, like when it starts to become applied to anything like shamanic yoga or shamanic, yogurt. But and it's harmful too when people think that if they trained at some certification for a weekend, they're now a shaman and now have the same level of rank and authority and spiritual power as a person trained in indigenous culture. That's not real at all. And I think there is real essential work being done by people who are trying to tend that word well and be in relationship also with the actual peoples where that word comes from. And I think when we just jump to animism versus shamanism, we lose that human role of tending the relationship between the spirit and human world, which is really characteristic of shamanic cultures. Like the first shaman in shamanic cultures is always this person who's sort of like half deity, half human in a way, or just deity altogether, that's teaching humans how to be that bridge. And I think right now, in this time in particular, looking to that role is really important and essential, because that person always comes during these times when the people have forgotten how to be good to each other. They've forgotten how to tend relationship and community and connection to the land well. And then the first shaman comes to teach them again. And I think we're in a time where we don't, that gap I was talking about between where humanity could be and where we are, we could, there could never be enough shamans to fill that gap. But if we are willing as people to look at what it means to be a shamanic practitioner, to what it means to live in what you might call shamanic ways that are honoring of that greater dream of all of life, I think that could begin to close that gap.
It's really beautiful. Can I ask a question,
Sure.
Carl? We're both excited to ask many things. I want to, just based on what's happening in culture and my own conversations and community, to ask you to talk a little bit about connecting with ancestors, and also how that, if you think it is important in anti-racist work.
That's a great question. Yeah. So For me, ancestral work has been a huge part of my practice. When I first started, I didn't know a lot about my ancestors. So I kind of felt like I knew ancestors were a thing and I should be connecting with my ancestors. So I had a little shrine. I knew, okay, I don't want to call the unwell ones. I just want to call the really, good, true, and beautiful ones that are ready to show up. But every time I showed up to my shrine, it was like a burden. It was like, okay, this is a thing I have to do every day, or once a week at the time. But what shifted that, I mean, it kind of felt like trying to connect from the bottom of a murky pond. Like I sort of would hear these warbled calls coming back from the top of the pond, with the bright, beautiful ones. But there was so much stuff that I was trying to speak through, so much ancestral baggage that I was carrying. And so, as part of my work in the cycle of transformation with the Last Mask Center for Shamanic Healing, I learned these really essential ancestral technologies that we teach online now as well, about how to, like I was talking about before, go to the root of these patterns, some of the most harmful patterns in your line, and work with the ancestors who began those patterns and clear them where they first started, and then pull the patterns up from the line after you've named them, so the other dead people that are stuck in those patterns also get to go, and then to shift those patterns in your own life and eventually call back those original ancestors who were in the dysfunction back as true ancestor helping spirits, to ancestralize them. And I think when we're not there's other good technologies for that. I'm also a trained practitioner of Daniel Ford's ancestral medicine work as well. That's been really helpful in my process also. So there's lots of beautiful technologies for doing this kind of work. But I think the reason that we need to do this kind of work right now is because we are stuck in the unresolved energy of the dead. When the dead aren't supported at the end of their life, we've had generations of dead people not being supported as they're dying in fully making sure they get to wherever they need to go and resolve and reconcile the sort of stuck issues of their life. And so from my perspective and in my lineage of teaching, when the dead don't have access to a body anymore because they've died, but they still have this unresolved stuff and they haven't moved on, they try to resolve that unresolved stuff through their living descendants because they still have free will and a body and ability to co-create reality. And so they don't know how to resolve their stuff. So they just keep replicating those same unresolved patterns, and they get bigger and bigger and they snowball down the lines. And we see young people manifesting the illnesses of much older people. We see people struggling with things like, pregnancy, which can be an ancestral issue. We see people just sort of with these blinders on, like as we're watching people like almost possessed by these old stories that we were talking about before, like white supremacy and Nazism, and just unable to perceive reality in any other way except through the filter of these unresolved dead. And so I think the more we can, one, cultivate relationship with our good, true, and beautiful ancestors, the ones who lived well and died well, which we all have in our lines if we go back far enough. And the more we can then work to engage that relationship to help move on the unresolved dead and resolve those deep-seated patterns, the more we can then step out of these cultural stories that we're all possessed by and remove our cultural blinders and enter into things like anti-racism work in a way that's not just mental, not just sort of trying to plaster over new beliefs over this old rotten foundation, but actually uprooting that rotten foundation where it started and being resourced in all the blessings that we're meant to have access to from our ancestors to make those new choices and shift those stories.
That's a great image. I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd love to hear you talk just about ritual in general. And, I resonate with the view of many teachers and colleagues that it's our original language, that we're ritual by nature. And yet many people in modern times have forgotten that capacity. So, how do you support people in sort of dusting off that layer of forgetting to remember that we are ritual beings?
Yeah, I think for me, a lot of times it doesn't take a lot to dust people off that layer, I find. Like if people know it's available in a way that feels real or authentic to them, because there's so much out there that is called ritual that I think instantly our instincts just go, oh, that's not for me. That doesn't seem good. Like, it seems very mental, or it just seems very, more about performance, and doesn't feel like actual ritual. But when people smell actual ritual, they want it. Like 90% of the time, I find.
Yeah.
And so I guess, I obviously have a little bit of a self-selecting, community of students and clients, but I find that in my life, even with friends and family members, one thing I start with is talking about how what I see and my community sees a lot of the troubles of our time, the cultural troubles of our time, is stemming from the abandonment of ritual. And what that looks like on a very practical level is the abandonment of tending the thresholds of, birth, like tending the new little ones coming, helping them remember what they came here to do, and before, like, vining with a mother while she's pregnant to make sure you know how to prepare for the child in a good way and can dialogue with the child as they're coming in. Then in initiation into adulthood, really helping adolescence only be like 2 weeks or 3 months and not like years or a whole lifetime, in that, which how it would be intended in indigenous culture. And understanding that initiation isn't just like going off into the woods to do something intense, but actually this dropping of your family of origin baggage, like really dropping all that family of origin baggage, remembering the truth of the medicine and purpose you came here to be, which has been tended by your elders since birth, as we were talking about with the birth threshold, and also connecting with spirit and nature as, sort of mother and father, like earth is mother, sky is father, or vice versa, whatever cosmology your particular culture has, in a way that's like visceral and real, that there's not a question that tree has a spirit in it that you can relate to. It's not like an intellectual query or a belief, but just like an experience in your day-to-day life. Oh yes, of course, I saw that tree spirit. I talked to them, during my initiation, and they supported me, and I'll remember that for the rest of my life. And then also this connection to the ancestors, this connection to the stream of wisdom and lineage that you are part of, that so you don't have to reinvent the wheel every generation. You have access to this wisdom. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I mean when I say tending that threshold of initiation into adulthood, all of that happening when you're a teenager, and then tending the threshold of eldership, so you can sort of make sure all the wisdom of your life is being transformed into medicine, like what's been poisoned is transformed into medicine, and you can share it with people. And then that death tending of making sure you're dying in a good way, in a reconciled way, and in right relationship with death, and know the stories that tell you where to go afterwards or what to do afterwards to not get stuck. Mm-hmm. And so we've largely abandoned the kind of rituals that tend all of those thresholds in a culture. And I think many people, as I said, are doing beautiful work trying to reweave different aspects of that from within a culture that's broken in this way. Mm-hmm. And so to me, that helps people feel that gap when you talk about it that way. Most people that I speak to, they feel that wound there. Mm-hmm. And so that helps, I think, people dust off a bit their sense of like what ritual is and what's possible with ritual. Mm-hmm. And then maybe the first ritual I might recommend to someone is just trying a fire ritual, a fire ritual to let something that needs to die, calling in that elemental support, calling in grandfather fire as a being to come support you in releasing something that you've held on to for too long. You just need help taking it off of you so you can actually move and become the person that no longer holds that thing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I'd love to ask, I'm going to see if I can weave these two questions into one. If it connects, great. If not, that's okay too. You speak so beautifully in the book about purpose and just this view that just seems so important for collectively us to get, that people come in with gifts and I would love to hear you talk about that. And also the other facet of it is about adulthood and how you see purpose, relation to purpose, and actual maturity as an adult connecting with each other.
Yeah. So for me, how I think about purpose is it's this energy that has never been seen before, that is the dream we fell so in love with, we decided to come to Earth to manifest it. It's like our reason that we're here. And from a shamanic perspective, like you find this across many different cultures, our health and well-being is measured by our proximity to our purpose, by our ability over the course of our life to stay in alignment with that energy we are and find vehicles for the expression of that energy. So understanding that, like, to be a teacher is not your purpose, but teacher could be a great vehicle for your purpose. And finding, as you move through the course of your life, more and more precise and sustainable vehicles for that purpose that also meet the needs of the time you're in. Because ostensibly, we're also here not just to do our own unique thing, but to do that unique thing in service to the dream of all of life, in service to the needs and challenges of the time that we're in right now. That's how I think about purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I would just love to say, I'm hearing in myself one of my really dear friends who we've interviewed, Michael Mead, a few times, and he speaks beautifully about genius, like your purpose seated. And she said, I love the conversation, but oh my God, I can't hear him talk about purpose and genius one more time, because she was feeling disconnected or like some pressure to figure out what it is. And, I'm just imagining if someone's listening to this feeling like, shit, I don't have any idea what my purpose is. So, speaking of dusting off, how might someone who might be feeling like that and listening to this connect?
Thank you for that question. It's so important because, I don't want to get in this place where like, oh, yes, I found my purpose. Don't you know what your purpose is? Like, that's not at all it. Because when you're really in relationship with your purpose, it's totally terrifying. It's not like, yes, I found my purpose now, and now I can be an elevated human being and just constantly find the next better vehicle. Like, that might be how you interpret what I just said, but that's not the experience of it. The experience of it is like, oh my God, this feels so right. Okay, I'm going to do this thing. Oh, wait, I totally got that a little sideways. Let's try to adjust that now. Oh, wait, everything's dying. Everything's destroying around me. Okay, let's try again. And you're tracking this energy that's like this, wild horse that you're trying to ride and stay on, and you get thrown off all the time. It's not like once you found a relationship with your purpose that always stays necessarily. Mm-hmm. But once you know what that feeling is like, you can orient back to it consciously.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it's so connected to your description of embodiment, of like, it's the flux and it's staying with something that is alive and ever changing and ever responding to what the needs of the culture and the world are. Exactly.
And it's so intrinsically related to our desire too. So a lot of my work is helping people to recover a relationship with their desire. Because for me, that was a big sort of, I talk about in the book a bit, that idea of, picking up your medicine and it first being poison when you pick it up. And then having through your work with it, transform it into medicine you can share. And for me, certainly desire was a big poison for me in terms of, at the beginning of my life, I really shut down completely my relationship with my desire. And that's part of the dissociation from my body too. And I think it is hard. Like if you're feeling really distant from your purpose, the next question asks, like, am I in my body? And like, so how can I sustain my capacity to more deeply inhabit my body and my connection to the earth through my body? And then once I'm in my body, how can I reconcile my relationship with my desire and begin to connect with that energy within me more? Because it's not about knowing, being able to put your purpose in a word so much as staying in relationship with the desire that is constantly in flux and changing, and being able to let that thread of desire guide you and being willing to risk continuing to find better expressions of relationship with that desire.
Can I go off on that, Carl? I'm going to ask you to respond to something, because I love that. I think that's really important, what you're talking about. And also, I find it like because I'm tracking my own inner body, getting a little like, a little uncomfortable with the conversation about orienting to desire, which is maybe my own work I need to do, but also I'll say a few things and let you comment on this. I think you use in the book also a distinction between consumer spirituality and community spirituality. And also I love in the book that you name Wetiko or Wendigo, this as indigenous cultures of Turtle Island see this like, I desire, I just want and want and want. And you know, how that's so rampant in our culture. And I'm sitting here, you know, as a woman socialized as white in this culture right now. And I feel like maybe my desire to be comfortable in this planet that is suffering so much from people consuming the hell out of it to be comfortable, or people who share my skin color who don't want to be made uncomfortable by being invited into conversations about racism or difficult topics. Like, how do we be in a healthy relationship with desire in the way you're talking about without moving into that consumer mode, or like, I just need to be comfortable and that's my desire, which is, I don't want to live like that. You know, I want to be willing to be made uncomfortable in the interest of the health of the whole, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think when I talk about desire, it's a very specific feeling. What you described as the desire of, you know, Wendigo or Tico, I would call more craving.
Mm-hmm.
It's never satiated. It's very addictive. It's very repetitive and actually boring ultimately. And that's not how desire is, because desire, like we've been talking about, like the theme of our conversation, I guess, is always changing and in flux. There's always, we never really reach the end of desire. And there's a lot of like, you know, Buddhist ideas about desire is suffering and all these, and that's what causes pain. That's not what I found to be true in my life. I think our cravings can cause suffering, and our addictive desires and our sort of false longings that are put into us by our culture. But if we're willing to be in relationship with our grief, if we're willing to really grieve and let our hearts be split open by grief, and there's a way that grief empties us out. That when you've had a really good cry, or grief can express in all different ways that are not just tears, but if you really have experienced grief moving through you like a storm or like a tsunami that just empties you out, you're left with this kind of possibility of being in deeper relationship with your true longing. Because ultimately our grief shows us what we're actually longing for. And that does not feel the same as craving. And it does not feel the same as a desire for comfort. It's often, one way we describe it in my community is it's like the raw bone of your longing rubbing up against the ache of your destiny, like in that emptiness. And that to me is the desire I'm talking about. It's not comfortable. And that's what motivates you to go out and try to do something about it, because you don't want to just sit in that desire, you know, which can be, sometimes it can be useful to cultivate that capacity to sit in that desire and feel that ache and not immediately try to jump out of it by feeding it in some way. And to me, that's a very skill that kind of different tricksters can teach us, like the sort of trickster in the positive sense, that ability to not just go for the bait right away, but to be willing to hold back your immediate craving for this deeper desire for greater rewards that you could get in that moment.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'd love to bring attention, you know, it seems like a central aspect of your work and your life is just the living presence of the heart and love. And I'd love for you to just reflect on the importance of that, and also in the importance of how that fits with these times of real deepening divisions, you know, so much suffering and violence happening in our culture, in the world, and destruction of life, and how those two go together.
I'm sorry, can you say that question one more time? I got a little lost.
It was a long way.
You're talking about presence of the heart. Yeah.
Yeah, the importance of the actual experience of the heart and love that seems so foundational. And then how does that affect how we're seeing people who are creating violence, who are different on another side, or, you know, where does the heart play a role in that?
Yeah. So for me, the heart is the great crucible or unifier of, like, when we're in our heart, we're really embodied in our heart. There's this ability to hold what you might perceive as opposites. Like, I feel in terms of like a visioning process of trying to create any meaningful change, either on a small scale in your individual life or on a collective level, there has to be an ability to both hold the vision you're working to move towards and hold the current reality, the mess that you're in currently, and also hold the truth of like the love holding all of that, the love and the mess and everything, just holding all of that, and to not collapse into one or the other, to not to collapse into the mess and like, life is just horrible, everything's hideous, you know, and not to collapse, or the anxiety of the news, and also not to collapse into like, I'm just going to be positive, everything's fake news, I'm just going to live in the reality I've manifested, everything's great for me in my bubble, you know. And we see both of those right now in our culture, so like bigger than ever before, perhaps. And the heart, I find, is what allows us to hold both. And then from that friction between the two, have the sort of creativity get sparked that guides us towards what we're wanting to create or manifest next, and guides us into relationship with that desire. Is talking about that's uncomfortable, because holding those opposites is not comfortable. But it's what allows us to take actions that actually have traction, that move us towards that vision and aren't just spiraling out in a fantasy, or getting mired in just chaos, you know. And so, and I think we can only increase the heart's capacity to do that through navigating towards heartbreak, actually, you know, being willing to move towards that which we are most in pain about, that which we most fear, and the discomfort of that, and let that crack our heart open and then heal our heart. Be willing to follow the path that that breaking open leads us down fully to the healing of the heart. And in that healing, the heart grows larger and has a greater capacity. That's the only way we can grow our hearts.
Yeah.
It's really beautiful.
Yeah, I love the line from Francis Weller where he says, maybe it's our broken hearts is the only thing that can save our butts.
Yeah, I think so. And I'm also suspicious sometimes of, this is not what Francis Weller is saying, but the suspicious of the tendency to think like, I just have to stay broken. I just have to stay in the sort of wounded healer space or whatever, you know, like that. I don't think that is really holding both either. There has to be this constant willingness to do both, to feel the brokenness and then also to feel the wholeness and the truth of that, because they're both real. Yeah.
Lux.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would love you to talk a little bit about your wonderful reframe about triggers, which is such a common word. Actually, one of our mentors always says, like, stop using the word triggered. Like, trigger means you're a gun, like you're weaponizing your own experience. But you say something about triggers as love notes. And it's pretty radical for many people, the way you reframe. And I would just love you to say it, because it's such a beautiful invitation to hold it in a different way.
Yeah. So with the word trigger, it is a difficult word because, you know, I think it does get overused, and I don't want to dilute the way it's used in a very clinical therapeutic setting where we're talking about like actual, you know, PTSD and going to flashback potentially or something like that. But how I think about the word trigger is, in my context, is that, like we've been talking about, there's certain moments in life where often when we're younger, where we think we're going to die if we don't do something that's not in alignment with our authenticity. So when I say think we're going to die, for children, there's sort of like these main fears of death that are very common, which is like fear of actual death, like from some abuse or horrible event or something, fear of not being loved, because people don't love me, maybe they won't feed me tomorrow, fear of being abandoned or being banished or being isolated or alone or being annihilated. Like all these for a child feel like death. And so when we think, if I don't do this, I'm not going to be loved, then we might make the choice that allows us to be loved as a child, to escape that death. But that choice is not in alignment with our authenticity. And again, the authenticity is not some fixed thing that we are, but that living process that we are. So this part becomes cut off, fragmented from the living process that we are.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happens when we're triggered, I think of it as life as a teacher, bringing these events into our experience, are sort of like our body and soul and life conspiring together to get us to look at these parts of us that are stuck in fearful moments and choices we made to survive. And so when we're triggered, we're sent sort of back in time to that moment. We begin perceiving reality unconsciously through the lens of that moment. And we're not accurately perceiving what's happening in real present time in that moment. And some people experience it as like a amping up, like out of proportion to what's actually happening. And some people experience it as a shutting down. For me, I was a big shutdown person for a lot of my life. So it was, for me, I would notice that I was triggered at the end of my day feeling totally drained or shut down or depressed, but I wouldn't even know in the moment what had happened. I wouldn't realize until the end of my day how I felt. Or I would notice myself like perseverating and thinking about something long after the fact that it happened, or finding myself making like a strong, harsh judgment against someone and not really knowing why. But all of those were responses to a trigger that was kind of invisible to me because I had just shut down in that moment of being triggered. And so then if we're willing to, so what I talk about in deep liberation a bit is this tool of flipping stones, of taking one of those stones you've tripped over the course of your day that you might call a trigger, and turning it over through a process of uncovering what it really feels like is being done to you in that moment of being triggered, and then tracking where that dynamic lives in your inner landscape. Because if we're being triggered and amping up out of proportion or shutting down in proportion to what's actually happening, it means somehow that outer dynamic is mirrored in our inner landscape.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that goes back to what we were talking about with the value of those qualities of focusing. Can I bring that care to the whole process, to the top of the stone, to the under the stone, to the tripping itself?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And I think what's valuable when we're willing to engage triggers in this way is it's very empowering, especially for people who share, various marginalized identities. You can see personal work as like, great, I have to do more work now because this like horrible racist person says something shitty to me. Like that's been an experience in my own life. But then when I did the work, when I was willing to unpack the trigger and go into its root, I was able to uncover the aspect of myself that was kind of still stuck in this kind of internalized racism, the place I was carrying that and replicating what I'd experienced as a child in terms of racism in my own energy body, and let go of that and reclaim the beauty and magic of me that was stuck in that old experience, and no longer be thinking about or angry about that person who did the racist thing. It doesn't mean they weren't an asshole, but it means they no longer are taking up space in my head, and no longer in a sense, I'm no longer giving my power to them.
Yeah.
Now, again, this is not to say we shouldn't be responding in the moment to horrible things people do or say, but I think that it's really hard to respond in a way that creates meaningful change when we're not also willing to be in relationship with the ways we carry the dynamics in our own energy body. Mm-hmm. And the goal of this kind of work is not emotional flatline. It's not like, I'm just going to be zened out all the time and never be triggered and have a wonderful life. It's not about making everything smooth, but it's about being able to liberate the heart's capacity to respond to what the moment is calling out of you, to let what energies are wanting to come through me in the moment, whether it's rage or jealousy or sadness or whatever it is, and just really feel it and express it and release it, and then go to the next emotion and not get stuck.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you named that. And just the, speaking about marginalized identities, and the way this comes through your own life and your own system as a queer Black man, that you can say this in a way that, what do I want to say? I don't imagine you're living in some fantasy bubble about everything is just, I don't know. Yeah, I appreciate the groundedness you're coming from in your own life. So knowing this has run through your own system and not, I don't know, I can't finish the sentence, but I'm appreciating what you're saying.
Yeah. I mean, never underestimate the power of any American to create their own fantasy bubbles, but no matter how marginalized you are. but yes, I think that does what I appreciate about the teachings that I hold, the lineages that I hold and that I've been drawn to, is I had a very low tolerance for any kind of bullshit that was going to deny my experience as a Black person, a queer person, just not be useful in uncovering the ways I had internalized, racism and homophobia, or, gender stuff, in my own landscape. And so I think, I sometimes talk about how it's not that Black people or queer people don't have their own racism and homophobia. It's that we have to deal with it sooner than people who don't share those identities do, or we'd kill ourselves. Like for me, it was very much life or death, that I had to find every tool I could and dig as deeply as I could to heal these wounds within myself that you still see played out in the larger culture. Because if I didn't, I was going to die. I was going to be very self-destructive. And so I think when it's important, it can be useful to look at, what are the places that I've decided are enough? What are the places that I've decided, okay, like you're talking about comfort, like I'm just going to go only this much in my transformation, that I have the privilege to stop at. And I have to ask myself that all the time, like as a person who identifies as a cis man, where are the places that I'm not going as far as I could into aspects around, gender identity or, ableism or, things, identities I don't necessarily share, that with the understanding that with, beautiful work that's been done, like with the Combahee River Collective, the Black feminist collective, where they said that if the world was truly safe for Black women, it would be safe for everyone. There's this way that if we're willing to move into those places of discomfort that our culture is telling us we don't have to go, but if we're willing to go there, we can become part of creating that world that is truly better for all of us. Yeah.
That's so beautiful. I feel like we could just geek out with you all day and talk about this stuff.
Yeah.
Do you have a copy of your book with you?
I have a Kindle version on my phone. That's about.
Well, I was
traveling at the moment.
About reading that the beautiful poetic end of the book, drip, drip, drip. That one. You know what I'm talking about?
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to. Let me just pull that up.
It's page 277 in my paper copy.
Okay, great. Here it is. Yeah. So this is just a little message that came through from a water spirit when I was in the Sonoran Desert. We were doing an eldership retreat, and I was really in a place of kind of grief and curiosity, because I really didn't know how we were going to make elders. Like, we were sort of assigning younger members of our community to help the older members of our community move into their eldership and kind of guide the process, in the hopes that we would call the eldership out of them. So it's like, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to show up as best I can. So help me, water. Maybe you know how to do this. I went to this ancient spring that the indigenous peoples of that land used to make pilgrimages to frequently. And I just talked to this deep water spirit that I had a relationship with, because we'd done a lot of retreats at this place. And it gave me this message. Drip, 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 drip. Everything starts right here with one drop of water. A waterfall, a roaring river, a rainstorm. it all starts with one falling drop, and another, and another. Water doesn't stop to ask, will I be loved if I fall off this precipice? Will I be isolated and alone if I emerge from this cool, dark crevice? Will I dry up and die and cease to exist if I leave the soft expanse of the sky and fall to earth? Water doesn't stop to worry and wonder. Water simply flows, opens, expresses, moves, down, 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 drip, 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 finding the lowest point, the deepest expression possible, slowly, consistently, drip by drip, giving life to the world. Take the first step, then the next. Trust, open, flow. Grow larger. The ocean is waiting. The world needs you.
I feel like I got the goosebumps, the truth bumps, like we were just visited by that water spirit. And thank you for giving voice to it. So beautiful.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was so good to have this conversation with both of you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your book and your work in the world. And yes, blessings.
Yeah.
To be continued in the flux.
Yes, absolutely. To the flux.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you enjoy this podcast, it's great if you want to share it with friends or post about it on social media. Also, you could make a donation to support the podcast or find out more information about our classes and offerings at our website, embodimentmatters.com.